Welcome to Canada's podcast. Ian, welcome to Canada's podcast. Great to meet you. I've been looking forward to it. I've done a little bit of research on you, and Fuel Positive is a very interesting company. But, we're here to talk about your entrepreneurial journey. So, tell us a little bit more about your journey to date, why you became an entrepreneur, where you are today, and you can do a little Fuel Positive kind of descriptor, that's fine. Sure. And then we'll kind of give us a quick sort of 3 to 5 minutes on that side of things.
Oh, yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to participate. It's a real pleasure to be here. A pleasure to, talk to a Canadian audience and really focus on how proud I am to be a Canadian, and doing the kind of work that we have been doing and are doing now is it's a very Canadian centric story. So I'm really happy to be here for that. But historically, I think I've only ever known what it is to be an entrepreneur. Both my parents, very entrepreneurial architects, and very much involved in the arts in Toronto growing up. So I never really saw anything other than kind of an entrepreneurial approach to life. And that was that, and not to fault anyone who is working 9 to 5. I mean, it's the core and basis of our workforce is obviously in so many places. But also to have the experience that you could always look for a different opportunity, be inspired by different things, be drawn in many different directions. It's a bit of a blessing and a curse, as you know. So, so this has always been the kind of the foundation of how I grew up. I became very interested in photography at a young age. I had the incredible opportunity to be one of Ansel Adams' assistants when I was 17 years old.
Wow.
Working in Yosemite and in Carmel. So at the very beginning of my life, having exposure and experience with somebody at the end of their life who, of course, had such an incredible
cars behind me, by the way.
I saw the cars. I can see the cars. Yeah, I'm wondering if there's an Adams print around the corner. So, yeah, and if I turned off my green screen, you'd see a bunch of Adams stuff. But that did two things for me. I mean, it made me realize that you can have a lifetime of creativity and that's an option, but also his huge focus on the environment, of course, and preserving this fragile earth that we all take for granted was a big, sort of a foundational part of certainly my character, and that at different stages in my life informed my journey.
And whereas I don't want this to be a sponsored podcast, I mean, a lot of people don't know what Fuel Positive is up to on an innovation level. And I think, based on today's climate, where we're at with climate change, with supply chain, with Ukraine and shortage of fertilizer and all kinds of things like that, maybe you can just explain a little bit about the innovation that Fuel Positive is deep into, basically.
So two things. I mean, Fuel Positive is a company that focuses on the decentralization of production of key product. So our first offering is green ammonia. So green ammonia ammonia is a resource, a commodity that's been around for over a century. It's used heavily in agriculture, of course, as a fertilizer, and it's produced in one of the most carbon-intense processes around the world. So it's a huge polluter, but it's also an essential element in feeding people around the world. So farmers use various types of ammonia and nitrogen fertilizers, of course, to grow crops. And the way it's done today is that you'll have a plant in Russia or Ukraine or the southern United States producing ammonia in this highly carbon intense process, reliant on fossil fuels, and then transporting it all over the world. Right. So by the time it gets to the farmer, by the time it gets to the farm, it's traveled typically, thousands and thousands of kilometers. It's accumulated tons and tons of carbon to get from production to end use, and it's gone up in price by orders of magnitude in that process. Yeah. So we were about 18 months ago, we're introduced to a scientific group at Ontario Technology University, just outside of Toronto, who had developed a modular and scalable green ammonia technology, where basically you take sustainable electricity, so wind or hydro or solar electricity, carbon-free electricity, and you produce green ammonia through a hydrogen and nitrogen process. And what we discovered was that this was such an efficient way of producing ammonia that we could then build systems that a farmer could have on their farm, right? So we could take away the entire supply chain, the uncertainty of supply, the crazy cost increases. I mean, the price of ammonia in Manitoba just over the last year has gone from $600. The last quote was $2,500 per ton delivered. Mm-hmm. So, and fertilizers are the number one input on any farm. So the cost, so farmers are facing bankruptcy or the option of not fertilizing or fertilizing much less, reducing yield, reducing income, and it's just it's a cascade.
Yeah.
It's like a domino effect for them. So we were saying, wait a second, we can fix this problem. We can create a system that can be installed on farm, produce and store anhydrous ammonia for the farmer. They have certainty then over price and supply, and then they can use it responsibly on the farm, which they've been doing in some cases for decades, and have that certainty. The other thing that it does is, and it's little known fact, that anhydrous ammonia can also be used as a fossil fuel replacement. So this same farmer who their two biggest inputs are fertilizer and fuel can produce all of their own fertilizer and fuel on farm. They can power their tractors. They can use their grain dryers. They can fertilize their fields. And if they have their own solar array or wind on their farm generation, they can be completely off grid and be independent. So you can imagine, I mean, coming out of supply chain nightmares from COVID and the horrible situation in Ukraine today, we're just seeing how vulnerable these antiquated distribution systems and way of doing business is. So as I said, this is our first offering, but we're all about decentralization. We think the same can happen in many aspects of transportation, and refrigeration is another huge opportunity here as well. Anyhow, so yeah, that's in a nutshell.
Very interesting. Let's move back to you again. But it's cool stuff. I just think it's really, really interesting. So let's just sort of throw something. What have you found is the best thing about being an entrepreneur? We were talking about nothing wrong with the 9 to 5, and there is nothing wrong. In fact, there's a lot of good things about it. But for you, you've been an entrepreneur for a long time. What makes you kind of hang in and have those highs, lows, risk days, success days, whatever?
For me, the biggest thing is the people that I've been exposed to over the years, and learning ultimately who I can work with, who I can't work with, what sort of building really, really good teams has been, I think, part of the most rewarding part of it, but also I think one of the most challenging part of it as well is learning how to really trust your instinct, trust your gut when it comes down to to choosing the people that you believe will make a good team. So, as a leader of a team, for me, it's all about the chemistry of that group of people and ensuring that you've got people who have the same values, who believe in the mission, whatever it is that you're trying to achieve, that they really believe in what you're doing and believe in each other, communicate effectively, and with that, you can really achieve anything. And as an entrepreneur, my worst experiences have been when I haven't trusted that, or I've been drawn in by narcissists, or I've been, that certain types of people, come across as being, really intriguing and supportive. But when you start to work with them intensely and intimately, you realize that, it's all about them. So learning to control ego has been a big learning over the years. And now I'm all about, building consensus, having a very horizontal structure in our organization. I realize this, in Fuel Positive, I'm the chief executive. So in a sense, the buck stops with me, but it also stops. We're a public company, so with our board of directors. But I don't try to operate the company with any sense of hierarchy. There's, it's a cliche, but there's no stupid question, that sort of thing. And really, rewarding people as well. I think being a very generous leader, I think, is also incredibly important.
Let's move on to, for me, what's a key piece of entrepreneurship, in terms of mentors, basically. And I would like to talk about them. My father, 50% planning, 50% hard work, 50% luck, 150% effort. It's not a
formula.
It's not a bad formula, we all have those things, whether it be a parent or somebody you've met along the way that we carry around in our back pocket, and you pull out every so often. You kind of talked a little bit about that, but in terms of mentorship, what do you feel that is a piece of advice that you've been given that resonates today, even?
Well, my parents have had a huge influence on me. My father particularly was, he was an incredible listener. And I often, when I get into situations where I'm confused or frustrated or don't know which way to turn, I realize that the thing I shut down the first is my ability to listen. So typically in those scenarios now, I'll pause, I'll ask questions, I'll seek guidance. I don't have to have all the answers. And knowing that is actually incredibly liberating. It takes a lot of pressure off. Mm-hmm. And then you share great ideas and you hear people. So definitely invoking that quality in my own dad was, is important. He's been gone for, I guess, 11, 12 years now. But he's still incredibly present. Right. And that aspect of influence is very strong in me.
A little bit on that, if you can go back 20 years, 25 years, what wouldn't you have done? In terms of, if you look at that 20 odd years, what did you do that was really stupid that you kind of could pass on to people? Don't go there, kind of thing.
Yeah. And this was a hard learning, but don't work with narcissists. I mean, it sounds like an absolute, a bit of a cliche today. And we've seen just the most incredible awareness around narcissism in our society over the last 5 years. But 20 years ago, you didn't really know what it wasn't a descriptive word. But the worst times I've had in business is when I've been in relationships, business relationships with a narcissistic personality, and they're, as I said earlier, they're really seductive, but they only care about themselves, and you can't, from my perspective at least, you can't build a healthy, successful business around narcissistic personalities. And that's not to say that there aren't businesses that are phenomenally successful led by narcissists, but they're the same ones where you get the horror stories of working with those people. So, and it's not all about money. It's not about that. It's about good, healthy relationships. And then the other thing is to, treat people fairly is critical. I've always tried to do that. It's not a problem, but again, when you have people who are, driven by greed or by fame or those types of, very shallow pursuits, soul pursuits, I'm not saying that you can't have things in a good balance. But if anything like that is sort of driving the bus, then I find that things can become very dysfunctional very quickly. So I've learned through that, and I've gone through a number of scenarios. I've been in businesses that have been acquired by much larger companies, complete dysfunction in terms of how to acquire. So as we've done our first major acquisition a year ago was the technology related to this green ammonia. Incredibly easy negotiation with the inventors. We were able to strike an incredibly fair deal with them. Again, very generous, but realistic in the context. So again, learning to treat people fairly has, it's been a struggle. And I think I finally, after 30 years of doing it, I finally figured that one out.
So if you had to pick one word to describe Ian Clifford, what would it be? Why?
I want to say probably at this point in my life, I think fair. I think that I try to be really balanced in terms of how I look at situations, how I work with people. In terms of fairness, I take people at their word and at their value. I give people the chance to succeed. But I'm not. That doesn't mean I'm easy. But I'm fair. So if you are who you say you are, which comes down to honesty, I love working with people in that context and with that level of trust and transparency.
Yeah, a fun one. Are you a morning or a night person?
I think I'm a morning person.
Yeah. It's about 80%.
Really? Oh, that's interesting.
It's funny.
It's funny,
Just a very, it's amazing how many people say morning.
But I've got a lot of it's interesting. A lot of my decision points, they have very often at around 2 a.m. I'll wake up and have this moment of clarity, write it down, thankfully, because it's forgotten in the morning. But most of it's not garbage.
I never stop thinking when I'm on to something.
Right.
You just can't do it. Yeah. But what books are you reading? Let's change that a little bit. You don't have to be reading them. What books have you read that you would say, if you haven't read it, you must? Okay.
Well, it's an interesting question. It goes back because I used to read an awful lot when I was younger, and interestingly, I really focused on novelists. So I read a lot of Margaret Atwood, a lot of Marge Piercy. I was really fascinated in the sort of the female voice and understanding society through those incredibly profound filters. And I think that it's really important to go back to that. I think Margaret Atwood is an absolute vital.
She's also in that shot behind me.
That's hilarious. So there you go. Obviously she was being channeled through the photograph, but so I mean, Canadian authors over the years, Michael O'Dante and others. I mean, I've always had a real interest in Canadian literature. I just find the way it's written feels very accessible, if you will. So I highly recommend. I'm doing less book reading now. Sadly, I mean, I've moved over to more kind of podcast type information absorption, if you will, as opposed to sitting down with a good book. But we're taking a bit of time off this summer, so I'm really looking forward to actually cracking open a book for a change.
So you love Canada. You've grown up in Toronto, and you've really, I guess, always had an international focus at the same time with your company. What's so good about why didn't you sort on down? I mean, you have an Austin, which is a great city. You have an Austin sort of office there. Why wouldn't you? What made you stay rooted here?
Well, interestingly, I mean, Austin, we did live there for a few years between 2016 and 2019. So, and it was kind of a funny story. We drove down in summer of 2016, and of course crossed the border, and it was all Hillary posters until we started getting farther south, and then we saw Trump posters, and we were like, what is going on here? No one's going to vote for this guy. So anyhow, so we arrived in Austin, and lived through the election there, and the whole reshaping of the United States. And you asked the question. So, we were there for those several years of sort of incomprehensible change. And this sort of goes back to my point around narcissism. It was like suddenly narcissism was just the way to be. And it was so instilled throughout American society and I mean, globally, of course, as well. But I realized that I don't have this voice. Like, this is not the way I think of the world. And when I think of Canada, I don't think of that, even though it's everywhere. But I think of Canadians and just the way our society functions and so on is so differently than what I had experienced living in the States. So I really missed it. Part of it was, and it was just getting crazier and crazier. I mean, in Texas, they were passing open carry laws for guns, and the downtown Austin was fine, but every kilometer you went from downtown, it just got weirder and weirder. Mm-hmm. So I mean, from a societal perspective, I mean, I think Canada is, we've got our problems, obviously, but I think we've also got one of the greatest countries in the world. And I don't say that lightly.
Still here after quite a few decades.
Having traveled all over the world.
It start here, as you can hear, but
no, I know, and neither did my parents. They came in the 50s and from Europe and from England and from Sweden. So I had a very, as a child, experienced Europe a lot, and as a young adult, as a photographer, I traveled all over the world. So I gained a lot of perspective, and this is. I desperately want my own kids to just travel. And of course, like over the last couple of years with COVID, it's been so depressing because I think, when I was 18, I would do anything to be anywhere. And our son who's 19 is like sort of has been trapped for the last couple of years. And it's just been painful to watch. So but can you imagine being, 18 in a pandemic? It's just horrible. So Canada, again, I mean, how we handled the pandemic, how we try to take care of each other, with all the missteps. But I think there's a genuine humanity in Canada, which makes us.
Let's just move back. What are you most excited about in your business and in sort of the emerging business of the future that maybe crosses over into other areas?
Well, the environment is central to everything. Like there isn't a business now that doesn't have some sort of social responsibility. And I mean, a lot of it is lip service. I get it, but we've never been in this place before where there is such a profound focus on saving the planet. And people now realize that that's what we're doing. We don't have a choice. So the neat thing about being in our space is we're empowering, people directly. So, farmers who will receive our systems will be direct recipients. So it's not like a trickle down process, through the supply chain. It's like, no, we are putting a system on your farm. We're hopefully changing your life for the better, and having a huge positive environmental impact at the same time. So we're looking for like-minded companies to work with in everything that we do. So we've sort of not coined, but we utilize the expression cradle to cradle in terms of how we approach our business. So we know we're not perfect yet. We still get we get components from Europe and other places in the world, but our intention is to source everything locally. Work locally, and try to build this company very much as a Canadian company. Ultimately, we will export our technology around the world, but initially we're focused very much on solving Canadian problems to start with. But
what you've got, Canada's not a bad pilot. I mean, it's a rather large agrarian economy.
Incredible, yeah. No, incredible. And a lot of progressive farmers, tons of progressive farmers, and also a great energy mix. So we're launching our initial systems in Manitoba, which is an entirely green grid, low cost electricity. It's perfect. So it's a perfect place to demonstrate the viability of what we're doing. Yeah, but it's Canada. And again, we're getting inquiries from all over the world for what we're proposing, because everyone realizes the centralized models don't work anymore. We've got to decentralize these vital aspects of our economies and societies.
Ian, I'm looking at our time. I think we're done. But it's an interesting discussion. How can people get a hold of you? I mean, we have lots of listeners and viewers, and that some of them, may be really interested. Farmers, I'm sure, the original entrepreneurs, I call them. But how can people get a hold of you?
Easiest way is just through email. So it's Ian at fuelpositive.com, or through our website, which is fuelpositive.com. Okay. Tons of very interesting information there. It's a very active website. Like it's a sort of a portal into the company, if you will. I absolutely invite people to visit us there and reach out. Yeah. I mean, we respond to every inbound inquiry. So we're very serious about that.
Thank you for coming on Canada's podcast. Great meeting you.
Yeah. Pleasure. Thank you so much.